It's the 25th January 2023. I'm going to be your host, Dana Durnford. We're going to be talking about one-ton bags in the nuclear wasteland. The nuclear industry calls me the gamma goat. I don't quite get it, but you can call me at 709-589-4406. Hope you had a good day. There's millions that didn't. So we're going to talk a special presentation, a special report on one-ton bags in the nuclear wasteland. I'd like to see the IAEA go down and mark on all of those one-ton bags that Dana is wrong. To see journalists doing it. Everybody's like, come on, be serious, Dana. We're talking. So these are two extraordinary pictures from the Japanese media where they're chastising people for suggesting the food is tainted with radiation because they're growing it right alongside of one-ton bags of radioactive fallout in a no-go zone because it's too radioactive. So you know you lost the planet when your biggest medias do stuff like that? Which is interesting because the Geiger counters can't find very much, but yet the food was banned in 14 prefectures by 55 countries worldwide. So I'm confused. Would you eat this food if it was from Hanford? Or Santa Susana? Or Chernobyl? Or 3 Mile Island? Or Sellafield? By the way, Sellafield is surrounded by farms. Go marking all of these bags. Radiation is good for you. Make lots of Hulks and Spider-Mans. We got a poll to reflect the madness of today's topic. Should batshit lunatic Japan continue to grow millions of pounds of food? It's almost 1 billion pounds of rice alone a year in millions of one-ton bags of radioactive soil. Now I'm limited to 100 letters, so time to put a few spaces between a few question marks, and it doesn't take long. Radioactive material from the reactors is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison and is poisoned for millions of years, unlike industrial poisons. So the food, what you're seeing in that depiction over there is the prefectures where the food was banned, and 14 countries still banned it. By 55 countries banned it for a decade. Japan slowly got people into key positions in those companies and removed those restrictions. So there's a story that came out today. It's going to be the third story. I'm going to take you back to make sure I got you up to speed before we jump into that story, because that's a rather detailed story. And then we're going to take you back through the years to look at the other stories of radioactive bags. And it's pretty well self-explanatory. So this is, what they're talking about here is 105,000 sites with one-ton bags of radiation. And the date on that, just for context, is not there, is March the 10th, 2019. In 2015, I think it was 150,000 sites. This is just a fraction. So there's over 150,000 sites like that. There was over 500,000 sites where they'd done radiation readings, because, you know, it's harmless. According to them, but according to the experts, nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. And that's going to be what we're going to be talking about. Delivery of radioactive soil to intern storage, which are Fukushima and Okuma. These are within 2 kilometers on the north and south side of multiple ongoing nuclear reactor meltdowns and 8 fuel pool fuel pools full of reactor cores that melted down in the middle of a massive radioactive wasteland. And so this one is 2015. And in 2015, bags of radioactive waste were piling up. And Tomoka, Fukushima Prefecture, 4 years after the nuclear disaster began. Remember, this 2019, there was, and you'll understand, right then there was 150,000 sites like this. Not just Fukushima Prefecture, we'll get to that. The government plans, and this is so important, and we don't have a dedicated presentation on this site because last year I did, and this year I don't. They took down my site. The year before, rather, when we were on a research expedition looking for spiders because they bioaccumulated 1,000% more than background because they liquefy all the other species that are bioaccumulating it, right? I'll explain that to you later, too. The government's plan to build depositories on around 16 square kilometers of land in the town of Akuma, which is a ghost town, a no-go zone. So who's going in there to do this, I wonder? And Fukushima, which is on the other side of the nuclear meltdown. These are within 2 kilometers of ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. So the industry really is, the entire nuclear industry, for some reason, hates your guts and the species. And I don't mean that as a cliche. I mean that figuratively and literally. Hates your guts and the species and your children. And with a passion. So again, let me remind you, Takuma and Fukushima, which host a crippled, calling it crippled is absurdness. There's a few other people that called it crippled.
What I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4.
That's what they're talking about over there, and they're saying magically 100 feet above the wreckage it's going to look like this, and everything is back to normal. They reversed time and nothing happened. That's just madness that your media done that repeatedly, and all of them. So the government plans to build depositories around 16 square kilometers in a nuclear wasteland, surrounded by a nuclear wasteland. And over next year, 43,000 cubic meters of waste, equivalent to less than 1% of the total. 1%, which is not there, obviously, but that's just to give you an idea what they're talking about, this kind of stuff. Whenever you see these in tarps, that's 1-ton bags of radiation. And typically it was 100,000 becquerels a kilogram before you put it in the bag. So these are extraordinary numbers. I'm going to add something else in there. That the outside layer and the top layer is supposed to be clean soil to shield people and the environment from the emissions. Does anybody really believe they actually done that? They were built to last a couple of years. They're going to claim 5. I'm not in the mood to argue, but 5 years is long gone. 22 million cubic meters created by the Fukushima #1 nuclear reactor meltdowns. You'll find out after that they're only acknowledging this is just 3% of the land and 7 prefectures. Most of it they're talking about in this particular instance is Fukushima Prefecture, but also 6 surrounding prefectures. And the food was banned from 14 prefectures. They didn't pick the bags up in. And they only picked up 3% of the land. This is kind of self-explanatory as we start getting into it. 22 million cubic meters. Now, the story from today is claiming there's only 14 million cubic meters. So this is what they do, right? It was originally 500,000 people evacuated. Now they claim only 150,000 evacuated. They claim that there's no radioactive fallout, but there's 150,000 sites like that. In 2015, 2019, they had brought them together. It was 120 or so, right? I'll get to that again coming up the full story. The government is negotiating with 2,400 landowners, 2,400 landowners to get the land to put the 1-ton bags on. The scope of it, it evades people, when you talk about these numbers, because Hanford dumped 450 billion gallons into the soil in the 50s. Not to mention the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, etc. But just in the 50s, and that wasn't all of it, that was just one spot. That's equal to 1.8 trillion liters. If you put that into context, you took a 6-foot wide aquarium and went up 518 feet and wrapped it around the entire planet once. That's how much 450 million gallons of very, very, very high-level legacy nuclear sludge is. It's a wall over 500 feet tall wrapped around the entire planet. No, Dana, everything will fit in a swimming pool. That's what the industry has done for 80 years. It told you fantasies. I'm here to sort that out. The government is negotiating with about 2,400 landowners. But they got 150,000 sites in 2015, 120,000 or so in 2019. So do you think 120,000 of these sites are going to fit on the land they're talking about? Of course not. And to give you context of how disconnected the nuclear industry actually is, the children are radioactive. They're breathing it and drinking it and consuming food all the time. And the evidence that the place is radioactive is endless, absurd, ridiculous, obscene amount of these 1 ton, which is just 3% of the land, was communities where they wanted victims to go back to make the industry look good, and farm fields so they can grow food. That'll be explained. And one community had up over 3,000 of these fake Geiger counters. We know they're fake because they don't register these numbers and they're surrounded by these bags. They were picked up in the communities. But the lessons we learned from it is... Okay, so Fukushima lessons learned from an extraordinary case, soil decontamination. By early 2019, the decontamination efforts had generated about 20 million cubic meters of waste. Remember, the first one was 22 million. 22 million is probably 3 rows of traffic, bumper to bumper, wrapped around the planet continuously, which was just only 3% of the land. And they acknowledged that coming up. Okay, so, because there's a story here today we're going to get, is the next story we'll get to after this one. Cost Japan state about 24 billion euros, which is what, 30 billion US, to pick up millions and millions and millions of 1 ton bags of radiation, and then claim it's safe to move into those homes while the bags are sitting there. Yeah, come on back. We're in the nuclear industry. We're magic people. Imagine us doing magic. Decontamination activities have mainly targeted agricultural landscape and residential areas. Super nice people in the nuclear industry, I notice, aren't they? By the way, your dog licks their feet all the time. So radioactive fallout and precious is not a good combination. Same thing for your cats. If you ever had a cat, you ever had a dog, you can visualize them licking their paws, which is the worst thing a dog or a cat can do now. So they cleaned up within, say, 50 feet of a house into the forest, but then they stopped right there. That'll come up to. The forests have not been cleaned up because their difficulty and very high cost they would represent, as they cover 75% of the surface area within the radioactive fallout zone. Excuse me. So they're only clean, the real number is 3%. So if you don't believe me, go down and mark on all of these bags that I'm wrong. The forest constitutes a potential long-term reservoir of radiocesium. Constitutes. It's still melting down, so it's still hemorrhaging out there, still airborne at a phenomenal, absurd rate. In cultivated areas with the special decontamination zone, which is at 3%, the surface layers of the soil was moved to the depths of 5 centimeters, which is an inch, and replaced with a new soil made of crushed granite available locally. So they're taking radioactive soil and putting back in a radioactive soil. So they're claiming they pick up an inch of the topsoil, so now it's safe to grow the food. Alongside of the 1-ton bags of radiation in a no-go zone, because there's too much radioactivity there, and ship it to market. And so somebody lost the plot a long time ago, and it was the nuclear industry. The plot was not to be this, never become this evil. Never, ever, ever become that evil. That should be the motto for all nuclear, if they continue to exist, is, for goodness sakes, don't be this evil. You've gone too far, and now you jeopardize the future of all species and humanity. And believe me, it's nothing to be proud of. And you don't have the right to poison every human and every species on the planet, despite the fact that you've done it. In areas further from the plant, substances known to fix a substitute for radiocesium, like potassium, fertilizers, zeolite powders, have been applied to the soil. So what they're suggesting is they picked up an inch of topsoil and replaced it with radioactive topsoil, and then sprinkled potassium there, and that's going to displace the cesium. The problem with that equation is it doesn't. It's truly one of the most absurd statements, and we beat them up pretty good, at least 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. We curb stomped them every time we read that. And we named and shamed them, those who were... Now, they made some of these same claims for Ukraine after Chernobyl, folks. There's no one to hold them accountable, and they'll do it every time if you don't. So what they're saying is potassium is going to stop it from not just cesium, but the uranium and plutonium and americium and neptunium and strontium and all the other fission products by putting potassium in the soil and zeolite. This is probably the most literally stupid statement in human history, and deadly. Substances known to fix, saying that potassium will fix the cesium, and that only cesium is the only stuff that's going to come out of the nuclear meltdowns. That's for the general population, not for anybody that has even a slight education on this topic. It just defies, which, when you see a statement like that, that's confirmation that they hate your guts. The nuclear industry, the nuclear academics, the nuclear companies, nuclear corporations, universities, the medias must hate your guts in order to let that slide unchallenged. And that's exactly what has happened for 80 years with nuclear industry, let alone since Fukushima. As far as woodland areas are concerned, only those within 20 meters, 60 feet, did I say 50, I think? Within 60 feet of a house were treated. And you know what I mean by treat? You can't treat trees that are radioactive. They're claiming by cutting branches and collecting litter, now everything is safe. The other 75% of all the background, nothing is taken off the hills or mountains. So what happens when it rains? I wonder, doesn't it wash it down into the... Of course, these bags can't contain it. Every time it rains, it washes right through the bags. And in some cases, it might even be worse by doing something like this, putting in big concentrations so the water can make it flow into your water tables more readily. Residential areas were also cleaned. Ditch cleaning, roof and gutter cleaning is not... You can't decontaminate a residential area. You have to dig it up. And then you're supposed to put a 12-foot chain link fence around the entire community and put signs 900 feet away from the chain link fence in multiple universal languages that not to go past the signs. And that the gardens were treated as cultivated areas. Again, think about how much they hate the kids in Japan. Smiling mascot asked Fukushima kids to gargle to stay safe from radioactive fallout. That radioactive sparkles unhappy children. A grinning bird mascot, these are two of them. Now, they gave 70-plus thousand children dosimeters, not Geiger counters, but dosimeters, where only the university students can read them, rather than remove them from the nuclear wasteland. And one of the biggest betrayals for organizations was what Safecast done. Safecast made sure the kids couldn't escape. Safecast deliberately hoodwinked the entire country and should be paid the ultimate price, particularly the head people that started that organization up. And in Japan, the ultimate price is severe. 150,000 sites like that, but there's no radiation at the playgrounds, despite the fact there's radiation everywhere. They're surrounded. You have to walk past millions of one-ton bags to get to the playground. Rather than evacuate them, they decided just to hoodwink them. And in order for that to work, every university and every academic of every discipline, every journalist had to participate in it. So as a human species, the emotion you should be feeling right now is humiliation. Soil from the Fukushima decontamination site. Now this is the story today. This was the catalyst. This was the catalyst for what we're doing tonight. This is the catalyst for what we're doing tonight. I forgot to do up a bunch of graphics. Can't believe that happened. You guys should be protesting. Dana slacked off on us, you bastard, Dana. It better not happen again, Durnford. But just to be sure, don't forget to subscribe anyway. It costs a little, goes a long way. Hello, everybody worldwide. I apologize because I'm on, YouTube. And clicking the bell might work, probably won't. They're most likely going to unsubscribe you. The majority of the people that comment are not subscribed to me. Because on the inside, I can see if they're subscribed or not. They've been unsubscribed so many times, they're just sick of trying to subscribe and getting unsubscribed, I guess. So at this point, it's okay to give me a thumbs up. Not that they're going to let that through on this topic, but hey. Consider posting links and blurps from my videos with different names. Nothing named me, nothing named Fukushima, all over the social media network. If you use my name, guess who's coming to visit? And they ain't really nice people. See, he was a pro-nuclear before he got into the nuclear waste. He was trying to commit suicide, and nuclear waste ended up being the Hulk. Spider-Man was trying to get bit by a spider and became Spider-Man. See, none of those stories are real. It never happened. But the children can't tell the difference. Krypton, by the way, is a brutal isotope for children who love Superman. No coincidences. They got so many heroes, you'll never find the real one. You can't keep up with it. Your parents are no longer heroes. They've been replaced by GoPro heroes and guitar heroes. Remember, there should be a price to pay for evil. The academics who are promoting potassium should be sitting in a chair like that. Or Japan should hold them accountable. We'll catch up to them later. Back to hell. Welcome to hell. Let's get up with the poll. Let's check out the poll. How bad are we getting hit tonight, I wonder? Should Japan continue to grow millions of pounds of food, it's almost 1 billion pounds of rice and just in Fukushima alone, a year in millions of 1-ton bags of radioactive soil, because that's what they're doing. We got a stunning 88% said no, Dana, of course not. You are right. And it's like, a few people might make a mistake and jump the gun and hit yes, and you can't retract it, unfortunately, I'm sure. Nobody could be so evil as to vote yes on purpose. Well, then again, we are talking about nuclear, Dana. Soil from Fukushima decontamination sites to be relocated for demonstration experiment. So that was the story from the day. Well, last night, as soon as the show was over, I found that headline. Because right now, at this time, when we're doing the show, it's just got daylight in Japan, right? It's early morning. It's around 8 a.m. or something in Japan right now. So when the show is over, their headlines are just making it into the cycle. And this is what I was faced with last night. And soil from Fukushima decontamination sites will be relocated for demonstration experiments. They're going to ship them back after they're finished with it, Dana. But who will ever know if they shipped it back or not? You'll see. The experiment aims to confirm the safety of reusing soil, what they call low radioactivity. If you're comparing it to a fuel rod, I suppose, but there is no safe level. The atom is in your body. Your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. That displaces red blood cells that were carrying oxygen and nutrition. The more you eat, the more you bioaccumulate in your body, the more that is under. Everything has to be, it's like millions of bullets in your body going off every second. And your body has to repair all the chromosomes, the DNA, and the cells that are being destroyed each second. And as you keep bioaccumulating it, eventually you got so much white blood cells, they call that leukemia. Yummy leukemia. No. The industry hates your guts and your children and the species. And the evidence is unbelievably crystal clear to anybody taking right the propaganda out of their eyes. The experiment aims to confirm the safety of reusing 1-ton bags of soil, and they're going to do it in a no-go zone, a radioactive wasteland on top of that, where you'll see those stories coming up. Last month, the government announced it will conduct an experiment. Now, this is yesterday's story. Last night, I should say, which was yesterday morning in Japan. An experiment on the feasibility of relocating soil from sites where decontamination work was carried out following the accident at the nuclear power plant. That was an event. It's no longer an accident. When it's nuclear, it's not an accident, it's an event. It's like saying a nuclear weapon went off. Oh, it was an accident. So therefore the radioactive fallout is not going to hurt anybody? The soil is slated to be moved to 3 locations in Kanto region. It's equivalent in one way of, say, going into everybody's households in a city and taking 3 spoonfuls of cyanide and putting it in the baby formulas and the children's milk. And say, oh, it's okay, it's just a little bit. The soil, you're not going to let it happen, hopefully. Unless you're the nuclear industry, you'd be like, yeah, this is great, Dana, tell us more. The soil is slated to be moved to 3 locations in the Kanto region, which is by Tokyo. So they got a vacant plot of land is one of them. This is in the National Gardens in Tokyo, where they're going to conduct a demonstration experiment using soil from the nuclear wasteland a couple of 100 kilometers away. Aims to confirm the safety of reusing soil with relatively low activity. With the stuff they're putting in the bags, and these are 1-ton bags, and they're in farmland, the other half they're farming, is 100,000 becquerels per kilogram. That's the lowest number. That was the number they needed for the criteria. And then the Geiger counters they were using were flawed. They would read very low. So it's probably 500,000 becquerels per kilogram. These are absurd numbers. while also reducing the amount of radioactive waste disposed of outside the prefecture. Well, wait a second, you just said you're going to ship it back when you finish with it. Well, if you did, it'll come up soon. And so the idea of cleaning up farmland in the communities, because they allegedly, you can't clean it up. The forest all around it is still radioactive. It's still hemorrhaging into the reactors. It'll make sense if you hang around. However, so when it's on the big screen like that, it cuts off some letters. Gaining public understanding over safety concerns are likely to prove a high hurdle. Gee, I wonder why. Allowing the accident at the plant owned by what is now, and was then, I might add. So why are they framing it that way? Tokyo Electric Power Companies, which went bankrupt, was nationalized. It's owned by the government because it was on the stock market. They took it over right away. Radioactive substances were discharged across the wide area, so the majority fell around the plant. Well, actually, the majority covered the entire planet in 19 days. We have multiple models acknowledging that. When you have documentation of the studies quantifying it. Again, this is a story from last night, right? To downplay it, the majority fell around the plant and the rest of the planet. The planet, not the plant, right? They screwed up. They meant the right planet. I'm sure they did. They're such noble people. Expedite the construction of the affected areas. Right? So, I'll make the point at the end because they tell so many lies, they can't even keep up with it. Go down marking all of these bags. Dana is wrong. The government began decontamination work soon after the meltdowns on residential and farmlands. They never stopped growing food. And just the Fukushima Prefecture, a single one of them over there, produces over 1 billion pounds a year. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days. Well, 55 countries banned it for a decade. And so Japan couldn't ship it anywhere, basically only Canada. And that's what they've done. And so Canada, everybody's sick in Canada right now. There's 1,800 illnesses and diseases, not autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses that'll manifest before cancer. On residential and farmland, like there. Most of the removed material was surface soil, a total of 14 million cubic meters of soil. Now, this was from last night, and I showed you 2 different headlines acknowledging over 20 million. We also have numbers at 30 million, and we also have numbers at 60 million one-ton bags of radiation. She's got to make sure it's not on blast.
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence. So
60 million is a big discrepancy from 14. 150,000 sites like this. But in 2019, they had conflated them to about 120,000 sites like that. Currently, the soil is stockpiled in 16 square kilometer storage facility. These are not storage facilities. Does that look like a storage facility to anybody? It spans 2 prefectural towns of Akuma and Futaba, which are a couple of miles away from ongoing multiple nuclear reactor meltdowns. And 8 fuel pools that were at the top of the buildings were incinerated and released into the environment. And then the media came out and pretended they're on the buildings that don't even actually exist. That's important for people that are trying to understand this and don't know the topic. I have to put that in there so you can appreciate the madness of the story. The plan for the soil is for it to be finally disposed of Now, this is really strange. Outside of Fukushima Prefecture by 2045. And nobody's going to take it. So what are you talking about? Well, they're going to use it in projects like building bridges and sidewalks and alongside of rice fields. When the government, and they'll not acknowledge that coming up, when the central government asked the two town governments to accept the facility, they didn't live there. There's nobody in the communities. It's a no-go zone. It's too radioactive to be habitable ever again. It pledged the storage, that's not going to stop the industry from trying. It pledged that the storage would be, and they're growing food there today, right? We covered stories about that a couple of months ago, where the farmers would drive to Fukushima to tend to their farms once a week. And what were they growing? I can't remember. Cucumbers? Right alongside of multiple ongoing nuclear meltdowns in a no-go zone. And they got a little section of Fukushima opened. It's just a little area where there's a couple of houses. And so you're allowed, those people can go to their houses, but they can't cross the street. It's too radioactive. So, like, when you look at nuclear, literally nothing makes sense. I think that's the plan, right? Nothing makes sense. When the central government asked the two town governments to accept the facility and pledge the storage would be temporary, a vow contained in the law of the establishment of Japan's environmental storage and safety, which passed in November 2014, the same year they pretended. This is 2014 too, and that is over there, 2014. They're pretending they're in that building. And you say, well, if we're pretending that, we might as well pretend we're going to get all the soil. The law stipulates the soil should be relocated outside the prefecture. But what are you talking about? If you have a nuclear accident, everybody else got to pay? Well, it's infinitely worse than that, Dana. The exact locations, methods of disposals, and other matters have yet to be decided. Well, that doesn't seem real. Watch this. And the environmental ministry believes we might avoid having to dispose of 75% of the soil because they only acknowledge cesium, and they're not really acknowledging that, of 8,000 becquerels or less per kilogram. 100 becquerels was the new limit for food after they dropped it from 500 becquerels a kilogram a year later. America and the EU raised theirs to 1,000 to make Japan look almost human, which obviously didn't work. To suggest there's only cesium in the bags is bizarre, and they are sticking to their guns. Because they're aware that the population can't sort this out. And so I work really hard to run an educational program to bring this to their attention, but obviously they can just stymie me and censor me, right? But there's a lot of people that have come through, had major organizations, major sites, superstars included, and none of them would get involved. None of them will give me a break and like tweet me out or something. Well, I shouldn't say none, but not enough. And we're in real trouble. First off, you can imagine there's 150,000 sites like that. It's hard to comprehend how many bags, 1-ton bags of radiation you're actually talking about there. They're not picking up 8,000 becquerels a kilogram. They're picking up 100,000 becquerels a kilogram, and they're only allegedly checking for gamma. Instead, it plans to reuse the material in public works nationwide. In such a case, the amount of hazardous soil for disposal will be reduced by about 25%. So it's not just cesium, there's 1,000 fission products you got to be scared shitless of. And by reducing the amount to be disposed, we hope to lower the hurdle for securing areas that are willing to accept the material as a final destination. By reducing the amount to be disposed through deceit and dishonesty and genocide and omnicide, this artist created this Fukushima boy in a spacesuit because of the radioactive fallout, with a Geiger counter on his chest, and tears coming out of his eyes, and holding a symbol of the Japanese sun They took him to court. The nuclear industry took him to court and made him remove it. According to the experts, and who are the experts, please? There's never a name to these so-called experts. A level of the 8,000, no, I don't hide away from anybody. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't got nothing to be ashamed of. I can stand tall before the man. A level of 8,000 becquerels per kilogram exposed a person of radiation to 1 millisievert, 1,000 microsieverts or less annually if they worked near the soil for 1,000 hours. This is utter madness to suggest. First off, this is completely airborne. You're not getting pulse energy. You're breathing actual physical particles. And you should never be working with those bags because you're going to be completely contaminated on day 1, let alone week 50. So it starts bioaccumulating up the food chain. And then you eat it. And then even if there's not very much, at 10 becquerels per day, you're still going to start bioaccumulating. Everything is attacked for the rest of your life by white blood cells, which compromises your immune system and leaves you more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. So for an adult, 20 becquerels a kilogram, but for a child, it's 70 becquerels a kilogram. This is whole body x-rays from the inside we're talking about. Heart attacks, lung problems, liver problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Just a fraction of the 1,800 diseases and illnesses that you will end up with, at one or some or many, in increments over time, and particularly as you're bioaccumulating, and particularly if you're victimized by the supermarkets. 1 millisievert per year is not how you would measure this. You would measure it in becquerels. See what he says? 8,000 becquerels per kilogram, but for you it's 1 millisievert per year. So that leaves everybody completely confused. And that's the point. And whoever wrote the article, they should be in jail for the rest of their life. Because this is murder to frame it this way in order to manipulate the population. That's actually murder. And to refer to the International Commission on Radiological Protection, which is basically the same people as UNSCEAR or IRPA or the IPCC, the same people at the IAEA, and many badges. There's around 100 of them, and they work together in all these different committees. And this is, again, United Nations. Most of these are United Nations. They're the same organization, the same people on different committees that will each back each other up, which is themselves. So United Nations is nobody's friend, even their own. To suggest that there's hardly any radiation when you're surrounded by millions and millions of one-ton bags from just 3% of the land that they picked up is revolting. They're not your friends. They will never be your friends. They'll always be your enemies. The nuclear industry will never be nothing but your enemy. And that's every species on the planet included. The ministry has already conducted similar experiments in Idiot Village in Minnesota City, where Minnesota and Lydia was at least 10 million becquerels a kilogram. We're talking gamma. Possibly 20 million becquerels a kilogram of cesium. You can't just have cesium. But that's what you'll see that routine over and over and over and over each day we're doing these shows, where the only thing they basically ever acknowledge, in the media for sure, will be cesium, and they barely acknowledge it. According to the crazies, measurements of radiation dose volume around the sites and radioactive density in agricultural products did not breach safety limits. There is no safe limit, and growing it alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation is insane. That's the definition of you lost your minds. You're insane. When you see stuff like that, that validates that they're actually insane. When you put it in the media, and that's where those pictures came from, and chastise you for questioning the food, that's its absurdness. That's not social engineering, which is nasty anymore. That's just evil. My goodness. So, Fukushima isn't the only prefecture you got to worry about. You got to worry about 14 prefectures. And we know that because 55 countries banned it for a decade. And then the nuclear industry put their people in key positions in those countries and slowly removed the restrictions with the shake of a hand. Like last night we had a poll, should a country have a referendum before they import food from idiot land known as Japan? Because it actually is idiot land. Japan has proved that there are countries where the majority of people are completely subservient. For its latest demonstration experiment, and for its latest is the key word in that one, by the way, the ministry plans to temporarily relocate portions of the Fukushima prefectural soil to taking radioactive soil to other parts of the country to experiment, and then they're going to bring it back, what they say, when they're finished. All 3 locations are managed by the batshit lunatic ministry, allowing the experiments to be conducted in areas not accessible, they say, to the public. It's going to be 10 meters wide, meter deep, will be dug and lined with waterproof sheets. 6 cubic meters of soil from decontamination site will be placed in the hole to a depth of 50 centimeters and covered by 50 centimeters regular soil, and then converted into a flower bed originally, so you don't panic. The radioactive levels will be measured, and any water that concentrates within the waterproof sheeting will be discharged into the sewer system, which they can't recycle because even the sediment from the sewage is too radioactive. They're lunatics. When the experiment ends, the soil from all 3 sites will return to Fukushima nuclear wasteland. But how will we know? Are they going to paint the bags a different color? Are they going to get a investigative forensic journalist to follow it all the way back? However, residents near the experiment site have voiced deep concern. The ministry held explanatory meetings, and this is by Tokyo. A 75-year-old woman says, "Is it really safe?" And a 77-year-old man said, "I'm not convinced why the experiment has to be conducted in central Tokyo." Well, everything is brutally radioactive in Tokyo, by the way, not just Fukushima and the 14 prefectures that were banned the food from for a decade, will be discharged into the sewer system after it's checked for safety, which is the Pacific Ocean. And it's always washing into the Pacific Ocean because only 3% of it's in the bag, which is laughable on top of that of a single prefecture. It is likely that the treated water from the plant will be discharged into the sea starting this summer. The pollutants' primary radioactive substances have been removed from the water. Of course, this is nonsense. This is 100% lunatic nonsense. Speaking of nonsense, look at my head. Look at the size of it. Should Japan continue to grow millions of pounds of food a year in millions of one-ton bags of radioactive soil? Well, 11% accidentally said yes, so we got 100% said no out of 37 votes. That's pretty good, you ask me. Way to go, everybody. 100% yes. Because people are used to clicking yes naturally, see? The disposal method for the water, among other measures, has been the subject of ongoing public discussion by unknown experts for many years, they claim. Every time I hear the word expert in nuclear, man, I get upset, eh? It's really something these subhuman species actually are. Burning debris from Fukushima. So it's even worse than that, because they're grinding up the nuclear waste and bringing it to all the incinerators all around Japan and burning it. You can't destroy radiation by burning it. So you're just going to liberate it back into the environment. It's literally the stupidest thing imaginable. And that seems to be the norm for the nuclear industry, apparently. The amount of processed waters continue to increase, and the water storage tanks are slated to reach full capacity. Well, let me just touch on the tanks. But we're not doing that tonight because we got 2 posts in the last couple of weeks of just on the tanks. Pacific, those 2 videos, presentations, is full of information. And I can guarantee you, you're never going to believe the word tanks again after you watch one of them. Preferably 2 of them if you're smart. Mari Yamaguchi is the cover story, right? We've been tracking her for years. So 2013, they had 1,000 tanks. You know how many tanks they got in 2023? 1,000 tanks. You know how many times they can fill up those tanks each day from a single reactor? 6 times. The tanks were built to manipulate you. 2014, 1,200 tanks. 2017, 900 tanks. And again, try walking with both of your feet flat on the ground. See how that works. 2019, they had 1,000 tanks in this line here. 2021, they got, you guessed it, 1,000 tanks. 2022, how many tanks do you think they got? 1,000. 2023, they built all the tanks to one time. The idea was to manipulate you into believing that everything's gone into the tanks and not into the ocean. In contrast, the amount of soil removed from the sites in Fukushima Prefecture is not likely to increase from its current level. Well, you stop paying attention, they stop picking it up, see? And you ran out of homeless anyway, because nuclear scientists are not going there. So there's no concern over the interim storage facility becoming full, and the time, like the amount we're talking about is absurd, as you'll see coming up. For the final disposal outside the prefecture is 20 more years. Why are you sticking it outside the prefecture and where? Well, it'll be everywhere we decide, Dana. 5,000 nuke plant workers suffering internal radiation exposure. But I thought they had paper suits on, Dana. Yeah, they don't protect you, unfortunately. There was over 300 police officers died in the no-go zones trying to keep looters out. Because they left all the banks and jewelry stores and supermarkets and hospitals behind, right? And homes and everything else. And there's enough scrupulous gangs out there. I mean, you know, there's cars going into Zambia and Russia that they got to send back because they're too radioactive to sit in. So they banned the food in 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima, which means they should have picked up bags in all 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima. Japan had an earthquake yesterday. They say it was a 5.2. Now, 5.2 is not a very big earthquake. No immediate reports of damage. Of course, not because it takes a while for that to be reported. They said the epicenter was 34 miles east of Nami, which is close to Fukushima. It was at a depth of 24 miles, which is very, very shallow. They said weak to light shaking was probably felt throughout the regions. And Kanto is Tokyo, a couple hundred kilometers away. Now they're talking about aftershocks are possible over the coming days. Well, a 5.2, you don't expect aftershocks. And I've never ever heard them talk about aftershocks. But there's a reason. Officials may temporarily shut down transportation infrastructure in the tremor zone to check for damage, which they never do for a 5.2. On the international scale, Japan's scale is 1 to 7. Utility outages are possible, particularly near the earthquake epicenter, but you just said there was no damage. Why are you suggesting all of this? And out of an abundance of caution, consider vacating multi-story buildings. Now they're telling them to evacuate tall buildings where shaking occurred until authorities confirm their structural integrity. This is a complete departure from the norm. Monitor and plan for aftershocks for a 5.2 is actually unheard of, unless it's on the Japanese scale. In 2018, Japan had a earthquake. 22,000 people were involved in the rescue effort of a 6.6 quake. Even a 6.6 is not that strong, right? But that was on the Japanese scale. They just forgot to tell you. After everybody started paying attention, Twitter acknowledged, or Wikipedia, that it was on the Japanese Shinzo intensity scale of 7 and a 6.7. So a 6.7 on the Japanese seismic intensity scale is a 9.5. Well, that's a big earthquake then. That must be big damage. It dropped the soil on all the mountains. Have you ever seen anything like that in your life from an earthquake? Or from a 6.7? That it lifted and dropped the roads? And when you look up close to these landslides, these are massive landslides. So the big picture doesn't really do it justice, right? Particularly pictures like that don't do it justice. But when you get up close, these are huge. We've never seen nothing like it. So it's a 6.7, which is a 9.5 on the Richter scale. And the evidence is in the documentation, but they actually hid it from everybody by calling it a 6.5. And when I went to the story and started researching, I was shocked to see the damage throughout the country. Now, why are they lying so much? Well, it turns out that the Tamari nuclear power plant, you see where it's located? Well, the X coming up is where the center of the earthquake is to. So you see the X. So look, it's right close, within 20 miles of the nuclear power plant. It's within 20 miles of a nuclear power plant where it dropped the mountains for miles and miles around. So they had an event and they covered it up. Otherwise, nuclear would be dead worldwide right now. So they sacrificed who knows what. Excuse me. Onwards and upwards. Fukushima laden with piles of radioactive soil that can't be moved into storage. Can't be moved into storage. And focus is shifting to the massive amount of radioactive tainted soil. It's not tainted. This is, you're not putting it in bags because it's tainted. You put it in the bags because it's radioactive nightmare. The construction interim facility that is supposed to hold the waste within Fukushima Prefecture for up to 30 years before it's disposed of has been delayed till you stop paying attention. Walking around the village, one can see mounds with green covers over them, concealing flexible containers that hold contaminated soil. And the amount of tainted soil stored temporarily like that, 2.4 million cubic meters just for the village of Lydia alone, which they moved back into. So 2.4 million one-ton bags in this little village where there are multiple farms shipping vegetables to your country from now. And the bags are still sitting there. So far, only 6,000 cubic meters of soil has been transported to an interim storage facility. Just for this village. Next year stands at about 22,000 cubic meters. At pace, under a simple calculation, it will take over 100 years to transport all the waste to an interim storage facility. From just this one community, it will take 100 years to ship it. Because imagine trying to count to 1 million. Imagine trying to move 1 million one-ton bags. It's a very daunting idea. And so they're just cutting it open where they're bringing it into Okuma and Fukushima, which are no-go zones right alongside of multiple ongoing nuclear reactor and fuel pool meltdowns, and just cutting them open and growing food in it. There's no way I'm going to live surrounded by mountains of contaminated soil, one person said. Better hope the nuclear industry doesn't hear you say that. It's areas that are under evacuation orders. It is the local municipalities, not the government, that handle the decontamination work. So the community has to decontaminate itself. And TEPCO won't take responsibility. Surrounded by millions and millions of one-ton bags, and they're saying she's perfectly fine, and that's impossible. The ultimate betrayal. And that's the story of nuclear, unfortunately. In 5 municipalities, including the cities of Fukushima, Koizumi, the contaminated soil left after decontamination work is mostly buried on site. In fact, every house in Koizumi and Fukushima City qualified for decontamination, which means you're not supposed to live there, ever. And only about 8% got decontaminated, but you can't decontaminate a house when it's radioactive. It can't be done, especially in a nuclear wasteland. A lecturer tells parents that Tokyo radiation is not so serious that to let the kids play outside. For the first couple of years, the parents wouldn't let the children go outdoors only to go to school, and wouldn't let them out until the next day of school. Never going out on the weekends, never playing in the sun for 2 years, because they know better. 6 years have passed since the outbreak of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and in many cases people have asked for the waste to be removed so they can extend or rebuild their homes. So they're very, very gullible people, unfortunately. They're living in a nuclear wasteland surrounded by millions of one-ton bags of radiation. They want the government to move it because they're freaked out. Instead of the universities and academics moving out of there for compassion and health, they're doing human guinea pig experiments for them. The slower you spread radiation, the more effectively it produces cancers and 1,800 illnesses. Japan is going the very best way to destroy the world. Oh, and farming activities. And so this picture shouldn't exist. There's zero reason a picture like that should exist. It would never exist pre-Fukushima. You would never see that in Canada. You would never see that in the United States. And now the nuclear industry is making it normal. It's normal. It's a very, very, very deadly precedence to do stuff like that. It costs several 100,000 yen to rebury the waste in a single case. They're talking about burying it and digging it up and burying it somewhere else later. That's their solution. That's their batshit crazy lunatic solution. They're going to bury it because it's pulsing so much energy. But until now, the Ministry of the Environment has not allowed funds to be used for reburying of such waste on the premise that it's supposed to be stored for only a short period of time. But the bags now have defied their lifespans. And you pick them up, they're going to fall apart. Separately, decontamination work has been carried out in prefectures besides Fukushima in 57 municipalities and 7 prefectures. 57 municipalities in 7 prefectures, including Tochigi and Miyagi. These are absurdly contaminated communities that they're moving people back into because people are, for lack of a better word, ignorant. The amount of contaminated soil in the case is standing at about 320,000 cubic meters. In about 95% of the cases, the soil is stored on site. They're talking about Fukushima City and Hiroshima City, which are at around 300,000 becquerels per square meter of just gamma. Go down and mark on all of these bags, my detractors, and tell me how wrong I am. New Minister Koizumi vows to tackle tainted soil. They're not picking up because it's tainted. They're picking up because it's absurdly radioactive. They're not burying it on site because it's tainted. They're burying it on site because it's pulsing so much energy. Putting it under the ground stops people from getting exceptional doses while they're getting exceptional doses. There is nothing to be proud of in the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry has absolutely zero redeeming qualities. Nothing. They don't have a single person in the entire nuclear industry worldwide that humanity can relate to. They got to bring in even more scarier idiots like Bill Gates and Elon Musk as their martyrs. Genuine trust will be created after a promise is fulfilled. Yuchibori. And Yuchibori should be in jail for 1,000 years. with the murder that he's caused, he should be getting the death penalty 1,000 times over, shouldn't he? He's a despicable example of a human. Looks like a human, but has none of the attributes whatsoever. No, your kid is perfectly fine. Don't walk too close to those bags on the way home. Disposing of Fukushima contaminated soil. Currently 105,000 on-site storage locations throughout the prefecture. 2019, right? In 2015 was 150,000 of these sites. A couple of years ago it was 119. So they had a video that I was going to play the video, but I have to worry about copyright sometimes. And I just skipped. So I'll just do a bunch of pictures. They're going to try to convince you that it's only that little section of radioactive. And here they are dumping the soil so they don't have bags anymore. That's the radioactive soil. They're bringing it, cutting the bags open and dumping it. And then they're going to move it later, they said. And all through the communities, you see these packages of nuclear waste, which means the whole community. This is just a fraction of what's there, right? But what they want you to believe is that now it's safe to be there, but it's not. And so the community has been lulled into this complacency, incapable of rationalizing, because they have no academics of any discipline to turn to. They have no universities to turn to. They have no media to turn to help them, to educate them. And so what I do here is just a little beacon of light. It's like a little lighthouse in a great big shitstorm. And those who manage to find me will get educated and validated for their worries. And that's the best I can do, unfortunately. And the research expeditions that I do have quantified our concerns 1 trillion times over. You should never be stood up in this environment. This is absurdness, eh? This is heartlessness of the nuclear industry. You should never be in that environment. You cannot avoid getting radioactive and being sick for the rest of your life from that exposure. You can't do it. So this is the sorting facility. We've got a story about that coming up. See the bag getting tore apart? And then they put it through a tumbler and get rid of sticks and rocks, the radioactive sticks and rocks. And Lord knows what they're doing with that. And then the soil is just dumped wherever they feel like it. There's zero checks and balances, not a single one. And the so-called checks and balances like the Environmental Ministry Office is the opposite of what you would expect out of a human. Contaminated soil, make roads out of it. And when it rains, it'll wash it into the water tables. This is not a solution. That's why pick it up if you're just going to dump it back into the environment, right? These are the concerned citizens who don't understand, but we're smart enough to catch them lying a few times and call them for it. 17% of the total planned volume has been transferred to temporary storage sites, but they're talking about Lydia, just a single community. You consider this is the final disposal area, don't you? One of the victims said. It's final disposal, said the panel. With 105,000 on-site storage locations, that's not one of them. The city is one of them. I'm not sure if it is correct to say final disposal. There's a difference between final disposal and reuse. That's one of the government scumbags right there, environmental ministry official. There are conspicuous objects covered by green sheets in parking lots in front of houses. To avoid increasing radioactivity around these on-site locations, contaminated soil is buried and surrounded by sandbags, which the crazies claim will keep it safe. But residents who don't know any better have no choice but to be manipulated. We feel uncomfortable having the contaminated soil around our homes, and so you should, you poor bastards. It plans to transfer soil containing less than, again, 8,000 becquerels. The minimum in the bags is 100,000 becquerels per kilogram. They're going to transfer what they call 8,000 becquerels per kilogram of just cesium for under roads and building levees, not only in Fukushima but all over Japan, because they got lots to go around. The ministry is also testing a recycling method, recycling 1-ton bags of radioactive fallout and minima soma, which is over 20 million becquerels a kilogram itself. Last December, the ministry announced that the process would allow 99% of the contaminated soil to be reused. It's not contaminated, it's deadly. That's why you've got millions and millions and $24 billion worth of 1-ton bags. This means that only 1% of the current volume of the contaminated soil will have to be permanently disposed of, and the rest of it can be reused. Well, that's not what you're supposed to do. You can't just make it go away, despite the fact that's what you're doing. But you can't. It doesn't denigrate like you're claiming. It's not just cesium, for goodness sakes. And this stuff is liberated into the environment over and over and over and over. The whole planet will pay a vicious price for what we're sitting in silence. Sitting in silence about this subject is not a very good option. That's where they're dumping salt in another place. Well, when it rains, that's going to end up, it's absurd to use it for anything. It needs to be put in a repository for millions of years. And they have no intentions of doing anything. Once people stop looking, this is what you see them start to do. The ministry began testing safety for using contaminated salt in Fukushima in 2017. They never stopped growing food there, folks. Contaminated soil has been buried under fields. And grown food in the ghost towns on top of that. The ministry wanted to bury contaminated soil under pathways that run alongside the rice paddies. Which doesn't surprise anybody, does it? When you see the real pictures, the real horror. Rain will soak the ground besides the road. There's a river that carries water for farming, for the rice fields, the town, and the school, and we're worried the contaminated water will leak. Well, there's nothing to contain it. It's not leaking, it's constant flowing. It's horrific. It's humiliating. Last April, the ministry held an information session. It was stationed in Fukushima at the time and covered the event. The ministry initially banned the press from the information session. They banned the press because they got nothing to hide, obviously. But residents persuaded the representatives to change the decision. What follows in the exchange, they recorded. First off, never forget that the International Atomic Energy Standards are based on natural, not man-made radiation. If that doesn't make you uncomfortable, you need to ponder that later. IAEA, the International UN lapdog, which is 195 militaries, today admitted there's no such thing as a safe level of radiation, and that the standards are based on natural, not safety. And we don't call them man-made anthropogenic because they're natural. Man-made doesn't have benefit. That's why you have millions and millions of 1-ton bags put away. The ministry initially banned the press. See, because a single atom on your lung can cause cancer, which is 1,800 other illnesses. 1,800 other illnesses and diseases will manifest typically before the cancer manifests, and the cancer will come. It's not like you're going to dig it up again and move it elsewhere. It's final disposal, isn't it? Said the resident environmental minister. Said we have different plans for final disposal and reuse. This is reuse. And the resident said, but you're describing the same thing twice. So you're just playing with words. It gets in your body, it pulses energy every second, wrecks your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells, minimum, and your organs, your body. At 50 becquerels a kilogram, you see permanent lesions to your organs for adults. At 50 becquerels a kilogram. So this is not up for debate. This meets the bar for evil. If terrorists were doing this, what would you say? If Al Qaeda was growing it in a nuclear wasteland, what would you be saying? I wonder. If the soil is safe, why not use it for public work construction projects for the Tokyo Olympics? Because this story was pre-Olympics. It destroys your body, period. Pulsing energy every second for the rest of your life. And not only that, your body's attacking it with white blood cells, which leaves you less oxygen and leaves you lethargic, where you start making poor decisions. As your body accumulates it, you get sicker and then you die. And so do your children and your friends and your families and your loved ones and your pets. This is not a game. He says his biggest concern was how burying the contaminated soil near the crops would harm the area's reputation. Well, this is a picture from the media trying to protect the farmer. I mean, we got the Japan Times headlines saying that the elderly should eat the Fukushima rice to help the farmers and protect the children who are more vulnerable to the radiation. Instead of the farmers should be arrested for producing food in a contaminated nuclear wasteland, they said the elderly, the people who built the country, who sacrificed it all, should be thrown under the bus so the nuclear industry can pretend it has some redeeming qualities. After testing was cancelled, he decided to use the contaminated soil to widen the expressway Minamasoma, which is 20 million becquerels a kilogram wasteland. But at an information session earlier in the month, a number of residents expressed opposition to that batshit plan. Mysterious black substance, so bacteria and fungus will bioaccumulate radiation like mad. Very dangerous to eat mushrooms anymore. Mysterious black substance has 1 million plus becquerels a kilogram of just cesium. And every time I heard the word cesium, I literally want to scream at a nuclear scientist for 5 or 6 hours. Verifying the safety of recycled contaminated soil will take time. You can't recycle nuclear waste. And you certainly can't recycle it for consumption. You can't be done. Because radioactive materials from the reactors is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison, and it's like that for millions of years. You can't make it safe. It doesn't work that way. Just a single atom will catch up with you in 10, 20, 30 years. Consuming it, breathing it, drinking it, washing it, laundries, cooking in it is going to, accelerate the bioaccumulation on a whole different level. Verifying the safety of you can't recycle radioactive soil. It makes everything else radioactive. Remember, it's 100,000 physical atoms per kilogram. Minimum. With shitty Geiger counters, obviously, so it's much more. The question, and which means lot got left behind then, right? The question of how to dispose of contaminated soil is not limited to Fukushima. That the same scenario is playing out in 7 other prefectures, like Wadi, Miyagi, Ibaraki, Chichigi, Guma, Saitama, and Chiba, which is 20 kilometers from Tokyo. I made a map for you, because I'm a sucker for punishment. So, these are other prefectures where they picked up 1-ton bags of radioactive fallout. The question of how to dispose of contaminated soil is not a limit to Fukushima's all those communities. And then when you look at comparison of where they're picking up the bags and where 55 countries banned the food from 14 prefectures, they're very, very similar, right? That's the bags, and that's where the food was banned. You can't fix something like this, see? And growing food alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation, there's probably zero possibility anybody could have predicted that pre-Fukushima, that could happen in ever, let alone our lifetimes. And in all of these places, authorities have been unable to find final disposal sites and are keeping contaminated soil on site, which is only 3% of the land they're talking about, by the way. And this one here is important, that He said, I work with NHK, which is the major bureau in Japan, media, the Fukushima Bureau, for 2 years, and have continued to cover the story since leaving last summer. And that the people in Fukushima that I spoke to all agree that their biggest hope is that the world never forgets what happened. Well, I'm here to try to help you. I'm Dana. How are you? I'm not going to let you down. I'm here to go to war for you and your loved ones and the species on your planet. And I appreciate the fact that you hope the world don't forget. And I have those similar hopes. Columbia medical professor inhaling just one hot particle can cause a cancer. Do you know you can put 2 million of these atoms on the head of a needle, you can't see it? Which means 2 million atoms on the head of a needle you can't see. If you distribute it to 2 million people, that's 2 million cancers down the road. Because your body attacks your white blood cells for the rest of your life and tries to build a tumor around it. It could take 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But once you got it in your body and it's sequestered in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Now, when it gets into children, like xenon or krypton and beta-net, they burn a hole through the children's lung. They ends up in their bone marrows, and they mutate their stem cells. It doesn't stop there, of course. Their thyroid glands are much more vulnerable, particularly the female of all species. And so they start producing radioactive hormones. You can see this is not going to turn out good for the future population of all species. And we're seeing eradication of many species because like birds and insects are way more vulnerable than the child. And the child is so vulnerable that 11 becquerels a kilogram, they'll see irreversible heart problems. Now, currently in Japan, from 2019 study, 14,200 children out of 100,000 live births need open heart surgery. These are catastrophic numbers. Soil from Fukushima radiation decontamination work to be reused in new farmland. 2021. 3 days after the 10th anniversary. Soil from the nuclear wasteland to be reused in farmland. A farmland development project testing the reusability, they went far past that scale, of soil generated from radiation decontamination work after the meltdowns at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station have been carried out by the Environmental Ministry. Japan doctor, children's health problems are increasing, incurable stomach aches, chest pains, nosebleeds that don't stop, diarrhea, have been carried out by the Environmental Ministry in a restricted, difficult to return zone. In other words, the farmers and the victims they're using to do it should never be in that environment. They're not going to be academics, they're going to be the homeless and the destitute and the victims that don't speak the language. The immigrants that don't speak the language. Although there are plans to send crop yields on farmland to markets in the future, the Japanese public, few among the Japanese public know about the scheme to reuse the decontamination soil. Such a strange statement, isn't it? Because 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. Look up the word irreversible sometime. And for those who are not understanding the significance of that statement, I'm sure everybody do, but I'm saying that to the nuclear industry, not to the loyal people that are worried about this subject. The village of Lydia in the Fukushima Prefecture district is a difficult return zone. Well, if it's a difficult return zone because of radiation, it'll always be a radioactive nuclear wasteland, which residents have been evacuated from since the onset of the high radiation doses. That never goes away. And that's a very long way away from the meltdowns, I might add. And he picked up 2.4 million bags just in that one community. So don't underestimate how evil they actually are. They're a white building stands, a recycling plant for removing twigs and rocks and other foreign objects from the radioactive soil. It's set to start operation in late March, which was last year. And the 34 hectares of land scheduled for reclamation stretch across the facility, and soil to the other side of the road is on. The land itself was formerly a rice paddy and will be made into farmland by filling it with soil removed from the radioactive cleanup. There's an estimated at least 430,000 tons of radioactive soil set to grow food in. It just doesn't even seem real, does it? Pre-Fukushima was 100 becquerels a kilogram, was 0.1 becquerel per kilogram, because they had had a few nuclear accidents, were considered safe to consume, but it wasn't. They just raised the limit because you couldn't get rid of it. After it, they raised it to 500 becquerels a kilogram, but they never checked. They gave the farmers dysfunctional Geiger counters, including scum safecast, and said that if it's over 500 becquerels a kilogram, mix it with rice that's not. So a year later, they had an extra 865,000 cancers compared to any other year, a spike. So they dropped the limits down by 100 to 100 becquerels a kilogram. But they're not actually checking. Cesium, again, every time you hear the word cesium, it's just extremely frustrating that anybody can be this evil consistently. Cesium concentration levels for corn, turnips, cherries, tomatoes harvested in 2020. So this didn't start in 2021, did it? 2020. They can't help but lie. It's the nature of the scum. We're between 0.1 and 2.3 becquerels per kilogram, below the 100 becquerels per kilogram standard for shippable products as specified by the ministry, not education, not academics, not nuclear, but of health, labor, and welfare, people who know nothing about the subject. To suggest growing food in a nuclear wasteland where you picked up 2.4 million one-ton bags, which was only 3% of the land, was only at barely detectable levels. I'm not sure why that's not criminal. It's not illegal to poison you, right? Congress and parliaments and diets around the world don't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with anthropogenic man-made radiation. Only the regulatory agencies can do that, and there's zero possibility they're going to do that. None of them ever done it. This can get anybody incredible different ways. These are just a fraction of a percent of the isotopes you need to worry about. Since 2020, the Environmental Ministry also tried cultivating crops in soil without the extra dirt. Although the products get disposed of for now, the ministry plans to give them to the village once the farmland is completed and have the goods shipped to market after commercial farming resumes in a nuclear wasteland. They're not evil. They're insidious monsters. Why then did it accept the reclamation project using decontamination soil? Because it's an evacuated community, still uninhabitable due to radiation. So xenon is known to cause dramatic increases in lung cancers. It bombards the humans with powerful X-rays and turns into cesium. And xenon from Fukushima is the most ever seen, 2.5 times Chernobyl. This was a radioactive plume model. The first one in the top left-hand corner was 20 days. The model actually would have covered the whole planet. They only put in what was considered venting. They never put in the actual meltdowns, the actual inventories. And none of the models, all the models are based on venting. The national government set up specified reconstruction revitalization bases in difficult-to-return zones in nuclear wastelands. So who's working in the nuclear wasteland in a paper suit? Well, it ain't nuclear experts or nuclear scientists or nuclear students or nuclear academics or pro-nuclear communities. It's strictly the victims of society, the people that are unbelievably incapable of doing something like this and making it work. And they're only picking up 3% of the land. So as soon as they finish, it's recontaminated immediately. It aims to lift the evacuation orders from the district in 2023. But then village head explained the only a mini reconstruction base of around 2 to 3 hectares can be made, which is what they done similar in Fukushima, where they opened up like an acre with a couple of houses, but the people weren't allowed to cross the street and they weren't allowed to stop anywhere else in the community. But then they'll, when you're not paying attention, they'll call it people move back. Move back to what? It's like going into New York City dump, where there's like 11 million people, and digging a hole to the center of the huge dump and then building a house there and saying, don't go past the fence and you'll be perfectly fine. It's ludicrous. See, because in the dump you can smell it, right? And taste it, unfortunately. But radiation you can't. You can't even perceive it. According to Kano, a national government employee who was with the village, in 2017, first proposed use of decontaminated soil. And so his name is actually mentioned in the story of the guy who came up with the idea to grow food in nuclear waste. He should get his own special page up on my website, you know. The majority of residents were in favor of the plan in hopes that the decontamination area may be expanded. The majority of the residents that shouldn't be there, it's a no-go zone. They're so manipulated by the nuclear industry for so long, they don't know right from wrong. We were told the land would be left barren and untreated by decontamination work. If this means it'll be restored, I have no choice but to accept the test. Well, like, they're only going to quote the crazies, the people that are too stupid to question the narrative or to rationalize what's really going on, and are foolish enough to go back into a nuclear wasteland. But, you know, if the district didn't accept the soil reuse project, the reconstruction here would have been left as it was. The district's approval of the farmland projects and the decontamination range expansion was unrelated. Of course it's not. It's absurd to suggest that it was. So, again, that's what that story was. Soil from Fukushima radiation decontamination work to be reused in new farmland. In a no-go zone, in a radioactive wasteland for the market. So in one of the studies, 13,646 out of 40,000 children had tumors. Girls had 4 times what boys and twice the size. Pre-Fukushima was 1 in a million. So when you scale it up, it's 358,000 out of a million. If you actually look at a million children, this is what you're going to find. And now it would be even worse because it's almost 12 years, right? Minister Vows' response to Fukushima reputational damage, October 2022. Like, so how can you call reputational damage when you do stuff like that and half your country was banned by 50, or half your country was banned by 55 countries, wouldn't take the food for a decade. How is that reputational damage? What you're doing is murder. That's clear and simple and plain. It's murder. At Fukushima, tons of radioactive soil wrapped up in plastic bags. Santa Fe News, 2014. On March 11, 2011, enormous plate of the Earth's surface plunged more than 160 feet towards the deep sea Japan trench at the height of a 10-story building, releasing so much energy that 2 years later, scientists could still measure nearly a half a degree centigrade temperatures increase along the fault line. That's their pictures for a change. Contractors bagged 250,000 tons of radioactive topsoil, piling the bags outdoors around Fukushima. The number's it's well over 30,000 in 2016. 2015, they emit to 22,000 one-ton bags. 40 minutes after the earthquake, towers of water slammed Japan's Pacific coastline, the largest waves reaching Sendai regions at a height of 133 feet. 133 feet. That's going into a nuclear power plant at 400 miles per hour when it hit the coastline. It ripped everything apart. Fukushima residents were left to ensure the bags do not break, leak, or fall over. The residents in the nuclear wasteland, the victims who were lied to and said they weren't radioactive, that had to walk past millions of one-ton bags to get there. This is February 20th, 2014. In Fukushima, tons of radioactive soil wrapped in plastic bags. That's the same story. It destroyed or severely damaged near 1 million buildings and left 4.4 million households without electricity. Over 1 million houses were destroyed, and the rest of it was radioactive. These events were only the prelude to what has come to be known as the disaster at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station, which ignited a series of radiation horrors that the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who thank goodness got assassinated last year, government is still struggling to cope with nearly 3 years later. If anybody deserved to be assassinated, it was Shinzo Abe. Today, just a few weeks before the 3-year anniversary, the disaster radiation problem is not contained. And this around the Fukushima plant operated by the Tokyo Electric Power Company. This is not how you check children. Any radiation, you got to throw all the clothes away, cut their hair off right away. Thousands of gallons. Think of the incredible arrogance to claim that thousands of gallons of radioactive water have leaked into the Pacific. Well, here's Germany's model from just the admitted releases.
Maybe worse than thought. Studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German Marine Research Institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
Yeah, and standing close to the ground, children are closer to the ground, right? So they're much more vulnerable. To say it leaked when the building doesn't even exist anymore is absurdness. Into the Pacific have been stored in containers the Japanese authorities know will not survive intact for years, much less for the decade of radioactive timeline. Well, this is a radioactive fallout model of just cesium-137, 134. The airborne total disposition. And I'm not sure what the timeline of this one was. But again, you notice how the model covers the whole planet always in around 20 days. The water storage challenge is simply the most public struggle the Japanese government and TEPCO are confronting. You can't store the radioactive water. They're pouring water over the melted reactor cores. The minimum is 2 sieverts a liter. If you try to filter it, then you can never change the filter. You can never get inside the building again after 20 minutes. It'll be thousands of sieverts. And you can't really filter it. So the water coming out the other end anyway is going to be, after 20 minutes, will be higher than the water you're putting in. It was a complete public relations scam. In December 2013, a visit to Fukushima Prefecture, where the government-hired contractors were charged with personally bagging 250,000 tons of low-level radioactive topsoil. No, it's at 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. That's a dirty bomb, but a kilogram. And it's low level. When you say low level, what do you mean low level? Because any level, no, there is no safe level. And piling the bags outdoors in 30 locations around the prefecture. And remember, this is 2013. Just Lydiate in Fukushima Prefecture is 2.4 million bags. I can guarantee you that's not 30 locations. And where local citizens were left to ensure that the bags do not leak, break, or fall over. Stored atop man-made plateaus built on nearby mountains, so when it rains, it floods in every direction. and around people's homes and rice fields. The bags are temporarily and designed to withstand the environment for 5 years, and we're now 12 years removed. Designed the environment for 5 years. Well, actually, it was 2 years. He's going to clean. He told so many lies. Why stop there, right? But then after that, therein, as they say, lies the rub. His construction company is under contract with the Japanese government to remove the soil, where they spent 24 billion euros on, leading the way in his truck. He explained that all the soil we drove over was clean, meaning it was imported from outside the radioactive zones to make the road. So that the prefecture is so radioactive, they had to get clean soil outside the prefecture to build the roads. And so many contradictions, right? But only 30 sites in the whole prefecture is what they claimed. There's so many contradictions that people like this who wrote the article should be arrested, should get at least life in jail, if not the death penalty for what they're doing. Explained that all the soil we drove over was clean. This is a model from NOAA. It's based on 40 days of radioactive fallout, but just from venting. It's not based on the actual nuclear meltdowns. And you can see the plume covering the whole planet. So when it stops, that's at 40 days, which is, I'm going to speed it up. So that's 40 days later. It doesn't stop coming out. It doesn't stop emissions. About 5 minutes into the drive, we pulled up to an almost incomprehensible sight. Crews of construction workers manned 18-wheel diesel flatbeds mounted with 4-story tall cranes which lifted 40,000 tons of radioactive soil. Dirt was extracted from radioactive farms and gardens in an area outside the immediate hot zone encircling the Fukushima Daiichi plant, and workers hauled the soil through the sea level plains and pine-covered Fukushima foothills and up the mountains, where they ultimately sealed it in blue weatherproof bags guaranteed to hold the contents safely inside for 5 years. This is 2013 story. And the clock is already ticking because they were picking up bags, according to him, in 2011. Who was the victims that they would put into the nuclear wasteland to do that? It was the homeless and the destitute, the victims of society. $16,000 workers quit, blamed severe working conditions. It's 2012. One evening in December 2013, an elderly man showed me around the village in Shindamo district of Fukushima. He took me to the vantage point where I could see piles of thousands and thousands and thousands of blue bags from village to village, rice field to rice field, home to home. I bet you did, yeah. Upon taking in the sight, I yelped so loud that he had to adjust his hearing aid. He explained the region's village had been abandoned by the young, with the elderly like himself left to farm the rice in the nuclear wasteland, hoping the radiation levels would be low enough to allow commercial marketing. Our only hope, he told me, is that we will restore farming so the young will return and bring life back to the nuclear wasteland. There's about 140 elderly residents who are left to manage 45,000 tons of blue bagged waste, ensuring the bags don't spill or break before they are trucked up the mountain. Which is a theme we're seeing in quite a few of these stories tonight, isn't it? Where the victims in the communities, they just leave the bags wherever they pick them up, and they want the community to make sure they don't tip over or spill or break open. So to go in and inspect it, you're going to get a brutal dose. You're breathing absurd amount just being in the prefecture. When you go into these zones, You're impossible not to be saturated with radiation. You immediately should sell all, or throw away all your clothes and cut your hair and shower intensely. It's simply a horror story. Though TEPCO and the Japanese government have been at pains to downplay the ongoing dangers related to Fukushima power plant, containment water leaked in October and November 2013 doubled, and oceanographic studies showed the cesium, again the word cesium is so insane, which has a 30-year half-life, has leached into the sea and is being carried on the Pacific currents. Well, I showed you the model from Germany, which was over 6 years. The airborne models covered the whole planet in 20 days. Because that's how the prevailing winds work. TEPCO conceded has grossly underestimated the strontium-90 in the emitted water, which is 5 times higher than previous stated. It takes about 1,000 days for the nuclear meltdown to start maxing out its strontium-90, which is 100 times more. For every cesium-137, there's 100 strontium-90s produced. And that stays that way for tens of thousands of days. These are doomsday machines. 2014, the Japanese government and TEPCO have considered everything from creating a wall of ice to contain the nuclear plant, to stop the flow of containment water, to mass burial of gallons of radioactive water. But concrete plans have yet to be presented that would actually solve the water problem. Well, they were using the water to mix in cement, right? Some of it, years ago, and I guess they got caught at it. In January 24, or maybe they didn't, Reuters reported TEPCO, desperate to find cleanup workers willing to brave the Fukushima nuclear wasteland, is recruiting among the homeless population of Tokyo. They're jacking them. They're shanghaiing them. To use a term from China, is recruiting from among the homeless populations of Tokyo, not the academics, not scientists. TEPCO, which was nationalized, is actually the government. This is madness. You can't clean up property of radioactive fallout and make it habitable again. All over the world, waste disposal is the primary conundrum facing the nuclear power industry. Everything is splitting atoms into the environment. The 1,000 fuel pools worldwide is a catastrophic event each day. There's another invisible plume covering the whole planet and never goes away. And then the next day you add another invisible plume covering the whole planet. It never goes away. It's a perpetual disease factory. These are perpetual machines. That's what they do. It's hard to give it context. That picture kind of helps. This is just a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. A few sites are standard supply to low-level radioactive substances like the soil of Fukushima. It never stops, see? Japan is learning that cleaning up a mess requires moving trash to a dump, but where does a nation dump hundreds of thousands of tons of radioactive trash and millions of gallons of isotope-emitting water? You're supposed to have that solved 50 years ago. Nuclear industry hasn't solved a single issue. Only how to manipulate you. They got that one solved. Since March, the Japanese government, along with every local governor and sector in the affected regions, which is the entire country, I might add, has struggled to cope with a seemingly unending series of questions and controversies related to the economy, radiation, land use, displaced people, and the stability of the multiple ongoing nuclear meltdowns. There is no stability. You didn't run away and leave your communities behind for something to do. And I can show you the industry hated leaving these communities more than anything else in the world. The towering waves destroyed the Fukushima plant's cooling system, causing a nuclear meltdown. And after the water receded, clouds of radioactive steam and dust spewed into the air and onto the soil of the Fukushima district. No, it covered the whole planet non-stop. And estimates, this is Al Jazeera, 2015, saying there was 30 million one-ton bags of radioactive waste, not 22,000, not 14, or 22 million, not 14 million, like they said last night. On March the 15th, just 4 days after the meltdown started, one of the nuclear reactors exploded, raining radioactive iodine. That's a maniac to suggest that radioactive. It was the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is curium isotopes. Curium isotopes need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium, which is named after the devil. This is a first picture of them going into control room 7 years after. They're only allowed to go in for a couple of minutes and never went back. Now the control room is off-site from the actual building. That's the building before they stripped it. And this is what they claim to look like on the inside. They claim they're inside the building. That's Rupert Winfield Hayes, one of the many scum, who claim they're on top of the building that don't exist anymore. And the IAE doing the same thing, that they weren't the IAE, eh? So you see this panel? They put panels around the building and then claim to look like that on the inside when the building actually doesn't exist anymore. What you're looking at is just the stump of this building. We got to come up with another word that's like Machiavellian, but worse than that. Enforcing mass evacuation of 160,000 residents, there was almost 500,000 left, 480,000. It didn't take them long to whittle the numbers down. It didn't take long at all. To mention iodine, because when people look up iodine, it says 8-day half-life, and they become disarmed, right? That's not an accident. Sending in all the homeless people in paper suits to clean up the community, to manipulate people to go, not clean. You can't clean it up, but to pretend they cleaned it up, it's just an absurd. It's an absurd evilness. Kimiko and Fumo owned a house and garden 10 kilometers from the Daiichi plant. They stayed put through the earthquake and tsunami before the government issued evacuation orders 18 days after the meltdown. Wow. And then claimed they were only exposed to 80,000 microsieverts. The measures of how the human body absorbs radiation. No, you're not absorbing it, you're breathing it. Absorbing is for fuel pools and stuff like that. X-rays is for, protons. These are physical particles. That's what the bags are not millisieverts, they're becquerels, they're physical atoms. So claiming by comparison in the nuclear wasteland that an X-ray for broken bone emits 3 millisieverts and the cement sarcophagus over Chernobyl emits 5 millisieverts, these are absurd numbers. They're completely different, see, than what was happening to the house. The World Health Organization was not supposed to exist and has a despicable, horrific legacy. Estimated its worst meltdown point at Chernobyl emitted 5,000 millisieverts per hour. That's 5 microsieverts per hour. 5 sieverts per hour. That's 3 sieverts is a lethal dose, causing terminal radiation sickness in all the exposed workers. All 600 helicopter pilots at Chernobyl died within a couple of weeks. All of them. You want to see that in their Wikipedia? The World Health Organization, which I truly despise them. 100% criminals. Like to have someone standing up in this environment on 1-ton bags of radiation is all you ever need to see to know the industry is ridiculously evil. Revoltingly evil. Insidiously, dangerously evil. And what does the scumbag World Health Organization deem to be safe? Well, they have no right to deem anything. They're a subsidy of a corporation that is Eisenhower called a military-industrial complex, that George Bush Sr. called a New World Order, and that has destroyed country after country with their military. The United Nations has their own military. they're not an entity of good. They have no redeeming qualities whatsoever. So they're growing the food in a nuclear wasteland, then faking it and claiming that they're testing every bag for radiation with this external machine, and everything's within limits. It's absurdness to suggest you're growing food in this wasteland and that everything is safe. It's absurd to grow food in the area. So Japan has no credibility forever because of that. And the existing radiation found in the environment. They talk about people that were left behind. Jobless, homeless couples with nothing more substantial than a 2-room cramped steel shelter set alongside identical steel shelters where they kept people slaves for years and wouldn't let them live their lives. The area within 30 kilometers of the meltdown was showered between March 11th and March 24th. It never stopped coming out. To suggest that that period is the sum of all evil, it's never stopped even today. It won't stop. Because we have disarmed the population into coming up with solutions. We've done the opposite of what we're supposed to do. The nuclear industry has made sure nobody has a future. As high as 10,000 millisieverts per hour to every child, which is 10 sieverts. That's got to be microsieverts you're talking about. What am I saying? Sorry. It's a nuclear wasteland, no matter where you go there. To suggest a radioactive iodine, which was, and they done that a lot, right? It's such a coward thing to do. It's such a betrayal to the human and to the species. The appointment from both Harvard and the University of Tokyo estimate those who are the most psychologically devastated are the mothers who did not leave the hard-hit areas right after tsunamis but stayed with their children in Futaba, Iwaki, and other suburbs in town. The government estimates the youths will have double the risk of developing thyroid cancers, which is just one of 1,800 illnesses and diseases that can be triggered by radiation. So whenever you talk about thyroid cancers, that's what you wish on them, hopefully. People don't understand the gravity of the dangers. I'm trying to explain it, and they're talking about thyroid. When you got to worry about everything: heart problems, liver problems, lung problems. Yep, they had no television, no radios, no communication, no internets. They didn't know to shelter. They didn't know to run away. .1,200 square kilometer tract of land is radioactive, and 300,000 people living in. When you look at the documentation, the industry, because it's got 80 years of telling lies, and the lies get bigger each year, more vicious each year, and their target is every species and every human on the entire planet. They can't exist without being evil. You can't decontaminate a community by grinding the radiation off the top of infrastructure. They done that to the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan 5 different times, and it didn't change anything. The air conditioning, the ventilation shafts are all contaminated. Dedicated to the monitoring radiation, teaching people how to eat their food, water, housing, and land, rather than being evacuated, rather than running away and surviving. And then promoting food, a lot cheaper, and playing on people's patriotism so they can go home and get sick and feed it to the children and have them get sick. So the nuclear industry is just insane. Fukushima grapples with toxic soil that nobody wants, including the nuclear industry. 8 years after the disaster, and not a single location will take the millions of cubic meters of radioactive soil that remains. Not even the icy wind blowing in from the coast seems to bother the men in the nuclear wasteland. You can't, like wearing a mask, a helmet, and gloves can't protect you from consuming, breathing, and being completely contaminated. In a nuclear wasteland, you can't avoid it. Playing their part in the world's biggest nuclear cleanup. You notice how you'll never see a story where they talk about academics, nuclear scientists, and nuclear students, and nuclear companies. They'll just people. A covered conveyor belt carries the soil to the lip of a huge pit where it's flattened in preparation for the next load, and there it will remain untouched. They're talking about cutting the soil open. Millions of cubic meters of radioactive soil packed into bags that carpet large swaths of the Fukushima Prefecture. But there's 7 other prefectures, right? I showed you that. It's not just Fukushima where they picked up all these bags to. Japan's government pledged the soil to be moved to an interim storage facility and by 2045 to a permanent site outside of the prefectures. But again, you hear them saying they're going to use 99% of it for work projects in communities across the country, and that only 1% will have to be stored. But by the time you get to that point, that 1% will have disappeared. Now, they're insane. The minute you stop looking, they start dumping the bags. Radioactive pollen. So claiming that 8,000 becquerels a kilogram is madness to suggest that's all it is. And then the storage facility straddles the town of Kuma and Futaba, which are no-go zones. So you got to go there to do that, even though there are no-go zones. Bringing in millions of one-ton highly dangerous radioactivity past all the evacuated communities and abandoned businesses. The operation involves thousands of workers, including drivers, make 1,600 return trips every day. So far, 355,000 trucks have been used. 355,000 trucks. Kind of gives you some context of the scale, right? I'm aware that some people are saying it'd be better to keep it there right alongside of multiple ongoing nuclear meltdowns. But the people of Kuma and Futaba really had a tough time and agreed the soil could be kept here and conditions would eventually be moved out of Fukushima. So, like, that kind of lie, that's a blatant lie. It's a hideous lie is what they're talking about. To lead the people on like that, instead of them going off and trying to rebuild their lives, keep them on a wire rope like this. Some safe neighborhoods still contain radioactive hotspots. And so they got these tarps, they got bags of dirt on top of it to stop the tarp from blowing away. And Greenpeace, which is controlled opposition, they sold us all out. Some areas have significant high levels of radiation, said Sean Burney, a nuclear specialist at Greenpeace. He used to work at Donneray, an absurd disease factory. It's going to take around 315 years, they say, to clean up Donneray in the UK, which was a reprocessing mixed oxide fuel site. And that's where he used to work. When he retired, he went to work for Greenpeace and sold everybody out. Get your exercises, start learning to breathe heavies, and suck in a lot of that radiation in the nuclear wasteland. There's times we're told to leave the contaminated topsoil and just remove the leaves so we can do everything on schedule. And I don't believe for a minute they'll be able to move all that soil out of Fukushima. That's why they're dumping it everywhere, right? The industry is insane. Radioactive soil, Fukushima, Japan, 30 million bags at 10 years. 30 million. Effectiveness of landscape decontamination following the Fukushima nuclear accident, a review. generated 20 million, what year was that? 2019. 20 million cubic meters, 1 ton bags of solid waste. It was generated by decontamination, may be decreased through incineration of combustible materials. That's a study saying go ahead and incinerate anything that's combustible, which means you're going to liberate the radiation back into the environment. And recycling of the less contaminated soil for civil engineering structures. These are maniacs, right? Just no shame at all. They just don't care. There's no one to hold them accountable. There's no law to make it illegal. The recultivation of farmland after decontamination raises additional questions associated with the fertility of remediated soil, potential transfer of residual radiocesium to the plants. Do people really think that they ran away and left their business behind for something to do? Because you can resolve it by recycling it. Airborne and ground contamination surveys demonstrated contamination was the highest, 100,000 becquerels a square meter, in a plume extending to the northwest of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, covering an area of 3,000 square kilometers. Tokyo was 29 million becquerels per square meter. It's like 360,000 becquerels per kilogram. So this is what they do. They just lie. And then they tell the bigger lies. Then they claim that Chernobyl was worse. Chernobyl was a single graphite reactor. Fukushima was 8 fuel pools with decades of reactor cores. Between 2011 and 2018, there were 578 published studies with the keywords radiocesium in Fukushima. I got a folder with 500. I might even do it tomorrow night if I make it through tonight. Radiocesium. France, effectiveness. France is the last country you would ever want to trust. Like, there's so many pro-nuclear scum that France is disgusting what they've done. Effectiveness of the landscape decontamination following the Fukushima nuclear action. You can't decontaminate the landscape. You can't decontaminate the houses and the streets and the sidewalks and the water and the air. You can't do that. Effectiveness of landscape decontamination following Fukushima nuclear accident. So there was 3 different people in the study. One was from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. My apologies to everybody. And another one from Japan. And the other one was from France. Their job was the 3 different countries producing a study to tell you a lie is still a lie. Typhoon Hagibis swept away bags full of radioactive nuclear waste, as Japan's authorities said nothing to worry about. In another typhoon, was 700 Fukushima bags swept away. Hard cases, eh? After tropical storm Itau. External cesium-137 doses to humans from soils influenced by Fukushima. And again, in this study, they claimed Chernobyl was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times worse. A small reactor compared to any of Fukushima's, with no fuel pools, a brand new reactor, was graphite, not pure uranium, plutonium like Fukushima's reactors. The maximum calculated external cesium annual effective doses received from the Chernobyl was 10 times higher relative to the Fukushima accident. And so the people that produced that study, the contempt I have for you is shocking. I can't publicly say what I think about you because apparently it's illegal. One of them was from China, another one was from Serbia, and another one from Taiwan. TEPCO said, no, it is yours. But what really, now they need $27 million to dispose of it. What is it, Dana? Get to it. The contaminated mud was produced at an industrial water supply facility. Takes in water from a river containing radioactive material, is grown by 5,000 tons each year. So the drinking water is so contaminated they can't get rid of the sediment from the reclamation and the water filtration. See, everybody in that community is incredibly radioactive. Evil is real, and nuclear is the tip of the iceberg. Operators refuse saying it's not able to handle the industrial waste, which is water sediment from your water reclamation filtration systems. Temper's like, no, we're not touching it. You found it, it's yours. Nah, 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 nah. Produced at industrial water supply facility that takes water from a river containing radioactive material. When your water sediment is, you got 50, 60,000 one-ton bags of sediment from your drinking water. It's too radioactive for you to get rid of, and you're making 5,000 extra tons each year. You're supposed to abandon the community, but there's a lot of stupid people, see? Like he thinks he's immune to radiation on a whole different scale. He's the definition of an idiot. That's an actual idiot. That's the town's idiot right there, like Uchibori. On the morning of the 28th, a 34-year-old worker was killed in the filtration system for radioactive material in Akuma, I think it is. Was killed in the belt conveyor at an intermediate storage facility that stored waste generated by decontamination in Fukushima Prefecture. In Akuma and Futaba, which are both within a couple of kilometers of ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. The action occurred in a place called an acceptance separation facility and the intermediate storage facility, which is divided in combustible material and soil that cannot be burned. So they're burning nuclear cleanup, is what they're telling you. That is frightening. It's the second case where a fatal accident occurred at that facility because they're so radioactive, they can't rationalize and they're making stupid mistakes. This is a picture of one of their dumps in Fukushima. They're dumping the soil. Cut the bags open, just dumping it. By and by, they'll forget where they dumped it. Japan has spent at least $13 billion. A team of UN experts said Japan should be less conservative in removing the radiation. Why does anybody listen to UN? Because they captured your governments and your universities and your medias in increments over decades, right? They were at that before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were called the League of Nations. Clearing the radioactive rubble heap that was Fukushima, they actually 7 years on. In 2016, the government increased its cost estimates to $75 billion, part of the overall $200 billion. And the private think tank said the cleanup costs could reach $660 billion. About 1 million tons of water kept in 1,000 tanks, and the volume grows by 100 tons a day. So a garden hose is your typical garden hose. A typical garden faucet is 130 tons a day for a half-inch hose. You have multiple nuclear meltdowns, and they're using a garden hose split 4 ways. Because they're claiming they're getting it all and putting it in tanks, right? They got it all. It's all in the tanks there, right? Isn't it? I can see it right there. Look at all the... You abandon the community because everything's in the tanks, right? To keep more water from seeping the ground and be tainted, more than 90% of the site has been paved. Which we see pictures of, right? A series of drains and underground barriers, a $325 million supposedly impermeable wall of frozen soil, $325 million, divided by the 260,000 people they worked on it is $1,250 each if you don't buy the wall. Why would you build an ice wall when you can build a real wall for a lot cheaper and it'll last a lot longer? And if there's areas where you need an ice wall, maybe you can put a little section there. But it's meant to stop the water from ingressing the site and going, because everything's downhill to the ocean, right? No, it's the law. It's the public relation firms looking at all the different ways it was going to the ocean and coming up with cover stories to accommodate the deceit and dishonesty. Especially during typhoons, precipitation spikes, so groundwater continues to be contaminated. Every facet of the story is a failure. People will not say when to decide what to do with all the stored water, because dumping it in the ocean would again invite censor at home and abroad. Censor. If you dump it, they got to censor people at home and abroad, is what they're talking about. They already spy on all anti-nuclear groups 24 hours a day. They admit that. Imagine what they're doing to me. They really don't have a lot of competition, see? They really don't. We're just trying to get through. Lake Barrett, who should be on death row for what he done at 3 Mile Island, and Arnie Gunnarsson included. After a partial meltdown, they boiled off 2 million gallons, he said, into the environment, and everybody stopped paying attention. That's a dirty bomb, see? They do it like it's nothing. They say it like it don't mean nothing. Like, oh yeah, no, we boiled it off. Then he claimed everybody got the same, 2 million people got the same dose as watching color television for an extra year. Actual studies, right? Gee, Dana, scientist's not going to lie to me. Hey, go home, drink your fluoride water.
Drinking is the act of ingesting water.
Oh, that's my system picking up my voice. I apologize for that. There he is again. The only condolences I got when I see a picture like that is he don't smile no more. And he's got a bunch of teeth missing because he got shot twice, thank goodness. Mass murderers don't deserve anything less. Again, they mention Greenpeace constantly. Greenpeace is the only people allowed to be talked. They're controlled opposition, see? They talk about 2014 that the utility managed to remove all 1,533 fuel bundles from the Reactor 4 reactor. Fuel pool, by the way, they're talking about. But actually, the fuel pool holds 3,800 assemblies, and there's 2 of them, so 7,600 assemblies. Each assembly weighs 1,800 pounds. That's what the building doesn't even exist that they're talking about. I showed you that earlier. Crippled Fukushima reactors are still a danger 5 years after the meltdowns. Just ask the kids. Is reluctant to share information. Uranium fuel in 3 of the 6 reactors eventually melted. They were changing the fuel in reactor 4, which meant they only changed half of it at most, right? So it was still half full of fuel. The explosion blew holes in the roof of the 3 reactor buildings. And the 4th one was blown apart and it was liquefied. Reactor 2 there, right? Releasing radioactive iodine, because Greenpeace is in there, see? So you talk about radioactive iodine to manipulate you. Emergency managers on site desperately try to cool the core. No, that was the homeless. Poured water in the damaged reactor building using fire hoses when it needs 4,500 tons a minute. Since then, TEPCO has substantially cleaned up the site. No, it hasn't. TEPCO don't even go to the site. Nuclear scientists have never went there. There's capped shredded roofs, removed spent fuel. Well, like, capped shredded roofs? They lie so naturally, right? You got to be so careful. They do it by nature. They don't. Evil doesn't know the difference, right? Let me give you a picture of reactor 3 and 4 to cap the roofs, so what they so-called. They capped the 2 stumps. There was no roof there. Because the molten fuel still generates heat by radioactive decay, which is splitting atoms into the environment. TEPCO has to keep pumping water through the reactor buildings, so 400 cubic meters a day, and storing it on site tanks. Around 8,000 workers are assisting in the cleanup. They said around 7,000 of them are working underwater, and that they're burning around 7,000 paper suits a day. Of course, there's zero possibility there's 8,000 people on these sites. We've been covering this for years. I got playlists and playlists of the pictures that they released over the years. One playlist is 6 videos, 1,900 pictures. We went through every single picture. And the most you're going to count is usually 5 or 6 people. Lying is natural. That's all they're good at. They're not good at anything else. It remains so radioactive, no humans can enter the reactor building. Except for the mainstream media, apparently. Helen Callicott was asked, is the building on the left what it looks like, or the building on the right?
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
But it can't, because the building don't exist. She wrote 14 anti-nuclear books. But Dana, she was threatened years ago with a gun. You really think I was shot at, for God's sakes? You really think I'm not threatened constantly? She should shut up and go away if she's not going to do the job, obviously. No, she's a perpetual lawyer, man. She done the interview hundreds of times on top of that. Tritium concentration remains many times higher than drinking water prescribed by a corporation nobody should really give a shit about. The World Health Organization don't have any sovereignty over any country. They co-opted key positions in your governments, and your government uses... They're a think tank, right? And they're a deadly think tank. Why are we turning to them? Can't we make our own decisions? We don't got anybody smart in our own country? Why are we sacrificing our future for an organization that has done nothing only poison us? Although the cesium has fallen below regulatory limits because of dilution in the Pacific, as levels in the oceans are many kilometers, Fukushima remain above pre-accident levels. One reason is that the rain and rivers keep washing the radionuclides off the land into the sea. Every time they have a typhoon down there, or rain or snow, the whole country is washing radioactivity into the ocean. It's a catastrophic event. We've had a catastrophic event. And we are not trying to come up with solutions. We've been disarmed by pretending that it's just iodines. Fukushima cost estimate doubled, approaching $200 billion. No, it's going to be at least $1 trillion. The Journal of Nuclear Medicine. Surely they won't sell us out, Dana. I guess again. That's exactly what they done. 2011, he said, nobody's going to get sick. Nobody's going to get injured. Don't listen to Dana, the fearmonger. We're almost through this. We're trying. 2011, May 26, new leak feared at the multiple ongoing nuclear meltdowns. In fact, in May, there was very few people on that site. We covered it extensively. Residents of Fukushima are forced to evacuate, were allowed to return briefly to their homes. A couple of months after the meltdown started, you let people go back. And that place is still a no-go zone 12 years later. And they knew that was the worst thing you could do on top of that, folks. They figured if you let them go back, make sure they get really sick and they won't have to deal with them in the future, see? I'm not kidding you. It's the same thing for Minamasoma at 20 million becquerels a kilogram in the soil of just cesium, for goodness sakes. We're allowed to go back to their homes for 2 hours wearing a hooded white protective suit. The suit can't protect you. The mask can't protect you. The goggles can't protect you. You need your own air supply, an extremely thick 4-foot steel suit. A lead suit, I should say. Yeah, you can go back in. We picked up all the radiation. Have a nice day, morons. Oh, no, totally safe. We're from the nuclear industry. Would we lie to you? You really think we would lie to you? Does that look like they would lie to anybody? Guess what? Guess what? You never guess. We made it. How long did that take? My stomach hurts. 2.5 hours. I never slept till 6 a.m. this morning. I was in so much pain last night. And the same night before, that I almost ended up at emergency. I done good today and done good yesterday in the day. In the evening, I started. It seems like when I'm ready to go to bed, that all of a sudden I end up in all kinds of pain. I don't understand it. 6 o'clock in the morning, I finally passed out on the couch. I couldn't lie down in the bed to get up and hold onto my head. I'm just hoping tonight doesn't. Praying tonight is so far so good. I mean, I done pretty good last night, I thought. Then about when I went ready to go to bed, everything went south on me. I'm sleeping on the couch tonight. There's zero possibilities I'm going to go back into that room tonight and have that might happen to me again. Happened 2 nights in a row. It wears you out, eh? That kind of pain. And I still haven't got the gas tank, come up with a solution to get it in. I can't find a backyard mechanic to do it for me. I'm too busted up to do it myself. But I'm probably going to have to do it myself if I can get the weather to cooperate. I don't have a level spot where I can jack up the whole vehicle and start reefing on the gas tank. Yeah, if I'm doing like brakes or outside stuff. But to get underneath the vehicle on uneven ground in adverse conditions in winter doesn't appeal to me because it's very difficult for me to do it on my own, right? I watched the videos. I know I got jacks to stick it on. I heard all of this. I couldn't get the whole tank to drop down, right? And then to find a garage to stick it in, they're going to rob you. And so that's out of my reach right now. I'm struggling anti-nuclear disseminator effects. Who cares? Main thing is we got a show tonight. Oh, we still got to finish with the poll. Should Japan continue to grow millions of pounds of food a year, which is almost 1 billion pounds just in Fukushima? Surrounding prefectures grow just as much of rice. And millions of 1-ton bags of radioactive soil. I'm pretty sure that I showed you enough pictures to articulate what I'm talking about. And if you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Don't worry if you don't. I'm not going to have a seizure or anything, but well, maybe later. But I'll suck my thumb in the corner later when no one's watching. That was a particularly brutal show. That was a lot of work. Yeah, good night, everybody. I'm picking at my eye. I got something poked myself in the eye now. I can't leave it alone. I'm going to go easy for the night. I'm going to wait until I'm dropping before I try to go to sleep. I'm starting to fall chair into sleep. My neck is hurting. I'm going to jump on the couch and pass out, hopefully. I take 2 major painkillers last night before I was finally able to pass out. That was 6 a.m. this morning. Nasty. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to quit right now because that's 2.5 hours. I'm too busy poking myself in the eye here to get past that. Let's call it a night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Tomorrow night's Friday, or Thursday, which is the last show of the week. We start our shows on Sunday. That's day 5. So far, we got a perfect record for January. We haven't missed a show yet. I'm surprised I even got a show in the night, but when I seen that headline about the radioactive soil, that pissed me off. So, and we needed a video out there that helps articulate the actual facts. And I hope I've done a good job of that tonight. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great day tomorrow and a great night tonight. We'll see everybody on the other side. And if you made it this far, like I say, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Take care, everybody. Gamma goat. Good night, everybody. We'll see everybody quick enough. Take care.